Hey everyone, so Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus is the most famous sorcerer or magician in the history of literature. Marlowe's tragedy is one of the most important and influential plays from the Renaissance, and it asks us a very simple question. What would you give for unlimited power? If you had the power to do anything, to rule the world, to acquire unlimited wealth, to satisfy your forbidden desires, what would you give up in exchange for that? Another way of formulating this is to think, what's the cost of that kind of lifestyle? See, Faustus sells his soul to achieve that kind of power. Does a life spent pursuing power, pursuing wealth or fame or satisfying your desires, do those kinds of lives come with a cost? I think maybe they do, and maybe we recognize that, right? That we have to give things up in exchange for the acquisition of power or status or money. And we wonder, just as Faustus does and Marlowe does, and I think Marlowe's audience did, is it worth it? Is it worth the price you would pay? Now, I want to stress, I don't think that the eternal damnation angle was purely metaphorical for Marlowe, or at least it wasn't metaphorical for his audiences. His audiences largely, not universally, but lots of people in the period believed very strongly in the devil, in the reality of the devil, in the reality of demons, in the reality of magic. All these things were real to his audiences. And the idea that you might be able to sell your soul to the devil, that was real. That was a real thing. But I think in some ways this metaphorical approach might help us if we're kind of skeptical or we don't really believe in demons or magic or something like that. That might help us approach this play and understand why the questions it asks and the themes it considers still resonate with us, with audiences, hundreds of years after the play is written. Maybe the story of Dr. Faustus is familiar to you, maybe not. Let me give you just a quick summary. Dr. Faustus is a scholar. He seems to have a broad understanding of science, of law, of theology, of philosophy. He's pursued all of these things. We learn this at the very beginning of the play, but his various pursuits, all these scholarly activities have proved to be unsatisfying. And so he decides at the beginning of the play that he's going to give all that up to study magic. Magic, Faustus believes, is the kind of knowledge, the kind of art that will ultimately satisfy his longings. These metaphysics of magicians and necromantic books are heavenly. Lines, circles, signs, letters, and characters. Aye, these are those that Faustus most desires. Oh, what a world of profit and delight, of power, of honor, of omnipotence is promised to the studious artisan. It's worth noting here that there's some overlap, some connective tissue between the Faustus story and another story you may be familiar with, the Ring of Gyges. The Ring of Gyges is a myth that appears in Book 2 of Plato's Republic. One of Socrates' interlocutors, Glaucon, tells this story about a man, simple man, shepherd, finds this corpse with a ring on its finger. He takes the ring, and what he finds is when he puts it on, it makes him invisible. Having discovered this power, the guy decides what he's going to do is go seduce the queen, assassinate the king, and then take over the kingdom. And Glaucon effectively says, well, this is what everyone would do with such a power. If you had a ring that would make you invisible, you would do terrible things. And the question of this myth in Plato is much like the question of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, right? So it's about unlimited power. More precisely in Plato, the question seems to be about what would you do if you knew you could get away with it? It's a related question, slightly different. What would you do if you knew you could get away with it? The fact that the ring makes you invisible allows you to get away with anything. And this, in a way, gives you extraordinary license, extraordinary freedom. And the reason I bring up this story is because I think there may be important differences between Plato's telling of this myth and Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, the kind of moral or the message or the question or problem that Marlowe is interested in this play. Because Socrates' rebuttal to the Ring of Gyges myth in Plato is that, well, actually, the person who truly understands what is good and what is bad, who understands the difference between right and wrong and the importance of doing the right thing to our souls, will not be corrupted by absolute power or the opportunity to do something terrible and get away with it. Because the wise person knows that you don't actually get away with it. That even if you don't get caught by the police or something, you still suffer. Your soul suffers. So when you do bad things, you suffer internally. And the pain of that internal suffering outweighs whatever benefits you might acquire through criminality, right? That's Socrates and Plato's argument. But the secret for Socrates is that you have to acquire this knowledge, right? You have to acquire this philosophical knowledge about what is best for human beings, what is fit for human beings, what is actually good. And that's why I think the beginning of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus is so interesting, because what we get here is a representation of someone who actually has extraordinary knowledge. Faustus has studied philosophy. He has studied law. He has studied science and theology. He seems, at least in a way, to be a thoughtful, educated person. So I wonder if we're not seeing a challenge to the Platonic position, in a way, in Marlowe's Faustus. Because Socrates suggests the difference between doing the right thing and the wrong thing is knowing, right? Knowledge. If you have knowledge, then you will know to do the right thing. And Marlowe seems to be suggesting, no, here's someone who has spent his life dedicated to the life of study, the life of the mind. He's going to do the wrong thing. So how do we understand that? There may be something here about the nature of knowledge, because what Faustus asks for, once he decides, all right, I'm going to commit to this magic thing. This is going to be my thing. He sends his apprentice off to bring to him two magicians that he knows, right? Two other scholars who practice magic or who know magic. And it's interesting. He talks to these guys and he's like, okay, you're right. I've taken your advice. I'm all in on magic. It's like they've persuaded him to like invest in Bitcoin or something like that. He's like, okay, yeah, guys, I'm in. And the interesting thing I find about this scene is that these guys, they make promises about the powers that Faustus is going to have. But if it were possible to attain these powers through magic, these guys ought to already have those powers, right? That why aren't they ruling the world? And so there is something there about like what kind of thinker is Faustus? Is he actually that smart? Because he apparently knows all this stuff. He spent his life in study, but he can't kind of work out that, okay, these guys say that once I practice magic like them, then I'll have unlimited power. But isn't it kind of weird that they don't have unlimited power? So there may be like some motivated reasoning going on with Faustus. Like he only sees what he wants to see. Let me take you to my favorite moment in the play, which is super weird. There's this super weird exchange. It has two parts, okay? And this, I think this moment is like the key to the whole play. So Faustus has debated with himself for a while about whether or not to sell his soul to the devil. Big decision. And he's concluded that he's going to do it. He's going to practice magic. And so in order to do this, he has to summon the demon Mephistopheles, who will be like, I don't know, kind of the go-between. He'll do the paperwork, right? The contracts. Had I as many souls as there be stars, I'd give them all for Mephistopheles. By him I'll be great emperor of the world, and make a bridge through the moving air to pass the ocean with a band of men. I'll join the hills that bind the Afric shore, and make that land continent to Spain, and both contributory to my crown. So Mephistopheles returns. He makes the deal with Faustus. Faustus has to sign a contract in his blood. And the deal is that Mephistopheles will be Faustus's servant for 24 years, only 24 years. And during that time, Mephistopheles will essentially affect whatever Faustus desires, right? He'll get him whatever he desires. Give him this kind of unlimited power. And so after some false starts, it takes a minute or two, and then Faustus sells his soul. And then there's this super weird exchange. Faustus, who seems to love knowledge, right? He has questions about the nature of the cosmos, about existence, and specifically about hell. So Faustus asks, where is hell exactly, like geographically speaking? Hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one's self-place. For where we are is hell, and where hell is must we ever be. And to conclude, when all the world dissolves and every creature shall be purified, all places shall be hell that is not heaven. And then Faustus replies, come, I think hell's a fable. So this is such a weird thing to say for someone who's just signed his soul to the devil and is speaking with a demon, right? Like, lots of people would say, oh, I don't believe in hell. Hell's not real. But if you conjured a demon and were speaking with one and signed a blood contract to sell your soul to the devil to get like magic power, Who did you think you were contracting with? What did you think the deal was? And Faustus goes on to say, look, if you think I'm going to eternal damnation at the end of these 24 years, like, joke's on you. So it seems that Faustus almost believes he's tricked the devil, but because hell doesn't exist. And Mephistopheles is kind of incredulous in this moment. He kind of points to himself and says, I'm evidence that hell exists. But Faustus remains kind of unpersuaded. And I think ultimately how we're to interpret this is partly about the kind of pride that Faustus has, right? He quite literally believes he's above the rules. It's evidence, I think, both of his pride and of his self-delusion, like the depth of his self-delusion. Which again, think of ourselves, the kinds of thinking mistakes that we make when we really want something, and how we might persuade ourselves that what we're going to do in order to get that thing, maybe we have ethical concerns about it, or we feel guilt or shame, but we kind of talk ourselves out of those feelings, right? And say, actually, no, anybody else would do this. I'm going to do it, right? It's actually not that bad. I think this moment of the play is an opportunity to think of ourselves and the kinds of thinking that we do when we're motivated by desire. So I think in this absurd exchange between a magician and a demon, we're actually seeing something very familiar, something probably all of us do at one point or another in our lives. Now, I mentioned that this weird scene had two parts, and here's the second part. Faustus asks for a wife. This is his first request. First thing he wants is a wife. And he's mostly motivated by lust, it seems. He says, I am wanton and lascivious. I want a wife. And Mephistopheles says no. And this is remarkable, I think, because the deal was for unlimited power. Anything I want, everything I want, in exchange for my soul. And the first thing Faustus asks for, the very first thing he asks for, he's told no. And this just gets weirder because Faustus objects. He says, well, no, I want a wife. And then Mephistopheles proceeds to talk him out of it and say, no. You don't want a wife. You don't want marriage. What you want is to satisfy your lust. And he presents Faustus. There's this moment where a demon comes in, disguised as a woman. That's what we get in the play. And it's kind of an ambiguous moment. You have to sort of imagine what this might have been like on the Renaissance stage. Remember, there are no women on the English Renaissance stage, right? Early modern English stage, no women. So it's all men. So this is effectively a man or a boy dressed in drag, right? And I think there's a number of possibilities for how this might be played. On the one hand, maybe it's played straight in a way, that this person who's presented to Faustus is made to look beautiful. But I think more likely that's not the case. This seems like it may be a comedic moment, like maybe you get the comic actor to dress up like kind of poorly, right? And like ill-fitting clothes or something and come onto the stage. Because when Faustus sees this demon devil woman, he seems to respond negatively. In the A text, he says, a plague on her for a hot whore. There's two texts of Dr. Faustus. We might discuss this for a second. There's an A text, which comes out in 1604. And then there's what we call the B text, which comes out in 1616. Both of these are published after Marlowe's death. The play was probably written in the early 1590s, but the written texts that we have come from after his death. And they are substantially different. There's actually quite a lot of material added, particularly to the B text, the second text. So these additions might have been worked out in production or performance. They might have been added later to extend the length of the play. They were likely added by someone who was not Marlowe. But these kinds of questions about authorship and who contributed to which text and how much is Marlowe and how much is not, there's a whole long scholarship on these questions. But in the A text, demon woman comes on the stage, a plague on you for a hot whore. The B text has a similar but different response. In the B text, he says, here's a hot whore indeed, no, I'll no wife. And I think in the B text, it's a little unclear, like is Faustus dismissing this demon woman or if he's attracted to this demon woman. And Mephistopheles says, listen, you don't need to worry about a wife. I'm going to basically like bring you an unending stream of courtesans, right? Your desires will be satisfied nightly. But immediately here, I think we have to ask if Faustus has been duped, right? Because the power he supposedly was going to have, this unlimited power, it's clearly not unlimited. There are limits on it. Mephistopheles won't do everything he's told. And there are other indications of this the deeper we get into the play. In the middle of the play, there's this comedic scene where Faustus goes to see the Pope. He makes himself invisible and basically just plays pranks. He does this stuff like when the Pope goes to drink, Faustus will snatch his cup, or he's offered something to eat and Faustus will take that from him. And it's sort of funny, and there's something kind of impious about it. In terms of context, important to remember, right, that England is a Protestant country. They're not Catholic. In fact, they're at war periodically with various Catholic countries. So to see someone playing pranks on the Pope is probably very delightful for a Protestant audience. But again, you have to remember at the beginning of this whole thing, Faustus had this rhetoric, this lofty rhetoric about ruling the world, moving continents, bringing them together, building bridges in the sky. None of that is happening. He's just like goofing around. And as, entertaining or cathartic as it might be to make fun of the Pope, what was the point of selling your soul exactly? Was that worth it? This is reinforced a little later in the play. One of the most interesting scenes is Faustus in the court of Charles V, who's the Holy Roman Emperor. And when the emperor greets Faustus, he seems to be sizing him up. Master Dr. Faustus, I have heard strange report of thy knowledge in the black art, how that none in my empire nor in the whole world can compare with thee for the rare effects of magic. This, therefore, is my request, that thou let me see some proof of thy skill, that mine eyes may be witness to confirm what my ears have heard reported. Faustus's response is simpering. My gracious sovereign, though I must confess myself far inferior to the report men have published, and nothing answerable to the honor of your imperial majesty, yet, for that love and duty binds me thereunto, I am content to do whatsoever your majesty shall command me. Who's this guy? Like, this was the guy who was going to rule the world. None of the kings and emperors will do anything without my say-so. What has happened to Faustus over the course of this play? I think that's the great mystery. I think what's kind of interesting here is the emperor almost seems to be sizing Faustus up, right? I've heard rumors about you, that you supposedly have power to do whatever you want. Well, here you are now in the court of someone with real power. Show me what you can do. That's essentially what the emperor says to him. And then Faustus kind of bows and says, I'm nothing compared to you. So here too, I think there might be this interesting difference between what Plato was talking about in the Republic and what Marlowe is talking about in Dr. Faustus. In the Ring of Gyges story, the shepherd with the ring, he actually does the thing. He seizes power. Faustus, as far as we see, doesn't do anything like that. So what does that say, right, about Marlowe's conception of the nature of temptation and the nature of power? Plato's account seems to suggest that power will corrupt, that by having absolute power, or the ability to get away with things, license, total freedom, the bad person will make themselves more bad, right? They will do bad things because they know they won't get caught, and that will ultimately harm them. Marlowe's analysis, it seems, is almost that, well, this person who has this license, has this freedom, will be corrupted maybe in a more profound way, right? It's actually the things they will do will be ignoble. Faustus doesn't seem like, he doesn't remind us of Macbeth or Julius Caesar, like somebody who has these tyrannical appetites and tries to satisfy them. He is a clown. And the things we see him undertake, the things he does with his magic power, are petty and small. So like the Platonic formulation seems to be something like, well, if you sacrifice the virtue of your soul in the interest of acquiring, material goods, then that will hurt you, because material riches are not equivalent to a healthy soul. But Marlowe's formulation seems to be something like, if you sell your soul in exchange for material goods, power, fame, wealth, sex, not only will you not have a healthy soul, but you won't get the earthly goods either. This reading is reinforced because the emperor asks, okay, so show me a trick. Can you bring Alexander the Great back from the dead? And Faustus says, no, I can't. He can't do it. He doesn't have that power. He says, the best I can do is give you like a phantom image of what they look like. And so again, we seem to get this trick where demons come on the stage dressed up like Alexander the Great. So he brings forth this phantom. And then a scene or two later, to impress some of his friends, he does the same trick with Helen of Troy, right? His buddies say, oh, we'd like to see the most beautiful woman in the world. So Faustus says, okay. He conjures the demon simulation, right? The Helen hologram. But then when he's alone, he's racked with guilt. He starts to worry about the deal he's made with the devil and the damage it's done to his soul. I do repent, and yet I do despair. Hell strives with grace for conquest in my breast. What shall I do to shun the snares of death? Then Mephistopheles appears and chastises him, calls him a traitor, and Faustus says, oh, I'm sorry. I remember the deal. Listen, I'd feel a lot better if I could sleep with Helen of Troy. And so then the phantom Helen returns to the stage. And we get here maybe the most famous speech from Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. Was this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burnt the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. Her lips suck forth my soul. See where it flies. Come, Helen, come, give me my soul again. Here will I dwell, for heaven be in these lips, and all is dross that is not Helena. So Faustus goes off with Helen here. And I think this is so important because it takes us all the way back to the first request, right? His request for a wife, which initially he rejected because he didn't want a phantom. He didn't want some demon dressed up as a beautiful woman. But that's what he's got here. We know that this isn't Helen herself. This is a demonic imitation of Helen. And so here again, this seems to be a form of self-delusion. Marlowe seems to be saying to us that this aspiration for unlimited power, these attempts to exercise unlimited power, to master the world, to bend it to our will, is fundamentally about self-delusion. That to pursue such power, I think, is to deceive yourself. Because I think for Marlowe, maybe more so than Plato, there's a way in which Plato suggests, I think, that, well, you could succeed in your goal. It will just come at too high a cost because you'll be miserable and your soul will be rotten. I think Marlowe might make the more radical argument that, no, you won't succeed, and your soul will be rotten. Your soul will be rotten, and you'll fail. And this might suggest that anything that looks like success, right? Anything that appears you're powerful, it appears you're wealthy, it appears you have everything you desire, maybe those things that we acquire when we trade our soul for material goods are really just phantoms of Helen. Maybe they're not really good at all. Whoa. At the very end of the play, the 24 years are up and Faustus's bill is due. The devil is coming for his soul. And one of his friends, this other scholar, says, look, Faustus, just repent. Like, you've got to repent. God's mercy is infinite. And Faustus is kind of past the point of no return. And his response to this is striking. He says, the devil might be forgiven, but not Faustus. And here I think we see the scope of Faustus's pride, because he believes he is so evil, right? So in kind of Christian theology, right? No one is beyond forgiveness, that God's forgiveness is infinite. Faustus believing that he's beyond forgiveness, that he's so bad that God himself could not forgive him, is actually to put a limit on God's love, right? So that itself is a kind of sinful, problematic belief. But this formulation that Faustus is worse than the devil, and this is this weird, like, inverted form of Faustian pride, right? Like he thinks so highly of himself that he imagines himself as worse than the worst thing. In some ways, the fundamental question here is what is the nature of the temptation that Faustus falls victim to? Is it just knowledge? Is the pursuit of knowledge itself necessarily prideful? I don't think so, because the play, I think, endeavors to teach us something. And so if the play sets out to teach us a lesson, I don't think it can conclude that all knowledge is bad. My sense is that Faustus, Marlowe through Faustus, encourages us to be skeptical about human power, about our prideful assumptions that we control more than we do. And we may fall victim to this, especially when we are rich or when we fantasize about being rich and powerful. We assume if we had those things, then we could control lots of things. We could change lots of things. We can make a difference or bend things to our will. Marlowe's Faustus, I think, suggests that to think that is to delude oneself. But this human desire to bend things to our will, to assert human mastery over the natural world, this was one of the major preoccupations of the early modern period. And to really understand that phenomenon, you have to really look at the work of Niccolo Machiavelli. I've got a video on that over here. You should check that out. I will see you there, and I'll talk to you soon.